You're listening to the Relationship Revival Podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. Welcome to the Relationship Revival Show. I'm here with Dr. George and Vanessa Naum. He also goes by Jeep. I'm really excited to have them on today because they specialize in coaching people who are in the healthcare space. And to be honest, even though I have my doctorate, I don't have a lot of doctor clients. I've had some who come in for maybe one or two sessions and then just kind of disappear. And for me, it's a little bit murky and cloudy as to what that lifestyle is like. So I selfishly, I have them on because I want to learn more. And Dr. George or Jeep, you have been a family doctor for many years, or you were. You're not still practicing as a family doctor, are you?
Not currently, John. No, or by your moniker, Mr. Spirituality, which I think fits you very well. I have been a physician. Let's see, how many years now? 33 years, but have not been in practice since 2018. We have focused on what we do over the last 5 years.
So why healthcare professionals? I know you have backgrounds. Probably, I think you were, before the interview started, we were talking a little bit, and you have backgrounds in healthcare even growing up, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So kind of give us the origin story. What kind of drove you to this demographic and the need for this service and kind of coaching?
I come from a family of physicians. My grandfather, who sadly passed before I was born, was a physician, and then my dad was a physician for 50 years. I have a brother who is a physician, and I have a godson nephew who's a physician. So a lot of background in not only the space, but in living through marriages. And my parents didn't have a good one. My dad, as I have said many times, is a phenomenal physician, not a very good husband, unfortunately. He kind of felt like he was the most important person in the house, and that what my mom did was not something that meant as much, or that the contribution that she made was not as significant as what he was doing. So she was constantly in a state of being made to feel not as important. And I saw that, a lot of arguments, and he was something, respect was big for him.
What kind of physician was he?
He was just like me, family physician. And so back in the day, he spent a lot of time away from house. He was, that was back at a time where you could deliver your own babies, do your own surgeries. You did everything until specialty came about. And so he was gone a lot. And then when he was home, it just seemed like they were fighting. And when they would get into an argument and he felt like he was being disrespected, it gave him, in his mind, permission to be unfaithful. And that happened a number of times. Didn't really find out about that till later on in my adolescence. But I knew I wanted to be a doctor, but I was equally as motivated to help people out once I got married, which was the second thing that really was important to me, in that I would help. And so I went through my training, which is a long, convoluted story in itself. But my best friend, my soulmate, came along when I was finishing training, and we had the same ideas about relationships, um, and she was in an agreement that she wanted to be helpful as well. And I'm going to let her talk about herself here in a minute. But after we got married, 2 years later, we got trained. And so we have been marriage and relationship coaches since 1994, but only in the digital space since 2018. So, honey, go ahead.
Yeah, prior to that, we were doing volunteer, and we really saw a need in the medical profession because docs are not used. They're used to fixing people, but they're not willing to admit that they need fixed, right? And so we come from the angle like, we know you, we know the lifestyle, we can put ourselves in your shoes and have a tremendous amount of empathy that we can just dial right into because we've lived it, and what we call a lifestyle, because it really is a different lifestyle than other professions. And so, we get that. We get that. And it's very easy because of training, because of grueling schedules. There are some pitfalls that we can get into. For example, Jeep and I got into some of the same pitfalls. And so we really talk about how we overcome those, and just really the tools that we've used over the years that help us to communicate in a way that we gain ground instead of it turning into an argument and a fight, and we're able to connect and talk, and that takes skill.
And what we do as coaches in this particular space is, like Vanessa said, we know all the pain points and have been through most of them ourselves. And one thing as a coach that you can do, and you can speak to this, and as I'm sure your wife can, that there's a wall there that you cannot pass when you get into talking about yourself and things that you may have gone through. In the coaching space, you're not bound by that, and so we can use ourselves and talk about these specific types of experiences that we have had. And it tends to really strengthen the bond we have with couples, because they know, okay, here are a couple that are talking to us that have been through this. This is how, and then they're telling us how they weathered that. And it's an experience usually that they have had.
Another thing that I'll say about it is I was married before Jeep, and I was in a relationship that was clearly not working. I grew up in a very traditional ethnic Italian family, and it was highly suggested that I marry Italian. And of course, being a people pleaser and wanting to please my parents, I did that. Unfortunately, he was an alcoholic and chose not to get better. So bringing that into our relationship, of course, I knew that we needed to be able to talk, and I needed to be able to explain my wants and needs to Jeep, but in a way that didn't trigger him, right? Because I learned a lot from my previous relationship.
When we first got together, she kind of brought that in, and we do that, as you know. You bring things into your relationship sometimes from prior ones. And,
sometimes I'd say always.
And not only does it affect your relationship, but it affects how you communicate. It affects so many things. And so she would, that concern when I would grab a beer or if I would grab a drink, it would send a trigger off for her. And I would say, honey, I'm not that way. But the only way you're going to understand that is to see that I'm not that way. So understanding about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a lot of tenderness and just willingness to meet me where I was and know that I had more potential. I just needed to grow through that. which I did, thankfully. So, but yeah, those beginning years were tough when I'd see him drinking, and if he went and had a drink, or came home and the day was just like horrendous and he just needed some wine, or wanted some wine, of course that kind of would
Absolutely.
set me off. But yeah, but there's a distinction between an alcoholic and someone that just chooses to drink socially. And I had to get that clear in my mind.
Absolutely. Tell me more about the specific challenges that healthcare professionals face. And is it only physicians, or are you talking about nurses as well?
Oh, absolutely, and that's why we say healthcare professionals. It's nurses, physicians, NPs, PAs, physical therapists, anybody in that space that has, we all have similar experiences in dealing with that. And it's an excellent question, and I'll give you an example of that kind of thing. When I started into practice, I came back, started my practice from scratch. I was recruited by a local hospital. So I went to a number of hospitals. In the Wheeling area, there were 5. Now there's, I think, 3. Some have closed. So my day consisted of going to the hospital, some of them before, if I had time, and then I would, usually had a 12-hour day. And then if I didn't get to all of them before I started, then afterward. And so my day usually started at 7, didn't end till 7. And if there was still time afterwards that I had to go to the hospital, sometimes didn't end till 9, 10, or 11, sometimes later than that. And so a typical day at the office is never a typical day. Some things happen that you cannot foresee, whether that is, and Vanessa was the office manager, so she had to deal with, the human resources. She dealt with insurance companies. She dealt with staff. I dealt with hospital administrators, and you, even if things are scheduled, things happen that you don't expect. And so by the end of the day, you're pretty spent. And so we had our first child pretty quickly. But Vanessa not only was at the office, but that was her first job. and so 4:00, she would go pick up the kids. She would come home, and she would start dinner. And as I said, I was still out, and usually by the end of the day, I was numb, and I didn't want to think about anything. And this is the kind of a catch-22 that people in the healthcare field get into, especially when they've had an extremely demanding day. And I fell into that pretty easily. And my dad used to do that. And this is where you kind of carry things and you emulate things that you have been given to you as an example growing up. He would come in. He didn't want to see any of us. He didn't want to, my mom would come at him with something that would happen during the day. And he'd be like, stop, let me sit down for an hour, have a drink, whatever. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I didn't like it. He kind of took it to an extreme, but so I would come home, walk through the door, and Vanessa would be in the kitchen, and the kids were pawing at her, and she's trying to make a meal, and I'm sitting in my chair, totally oblivious to what's going on around me, because I'm focused on decompressing. Sure. And I'm not really doing anything while all this is happening with her. And so after a period of time, she got rather sick of it, which she rightfully should have. And so I'll let her tell you how we handled that. But it came to a head, and she needed to have the courage to talk to me, which she should have never had to do it. But she did. And how did we tell him how you felt during this?
Oh, I felt like a single parent. totally single parent. And my feelings were, my job is just as important as yours. And I spend almost the same amount of time at your office that you do. The difference is, of course, you go to hospitals afterwards. And there were sacrifices that we had to give up. For example, the kids can't wait till 8 o'clock to have dinner. They needed to have dinner sooner. So one of the sacrifices was we couldn't sit down and have a meal together as a family. And so that, of course, him walking through the door and needing more time when I hadn't had my time yet, and desperately needing my time to decompress. And so, I had to just keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. So then you get into the nag mode, right? And then you start going down a slippery slope with, resentment building. And we just had to use the tools that we were taught. And I had to paint the picture of how lonely I felt by not getting help. And also that he wanted to have children as well. And children need to be, in our opinion, need to be raised by both parents in a marriage. And so it's just, talking about that.
There's a phrase in certain professions. I don't know if you have one in the medical one, but in politics, they call it a campaign widow, where the husband is just, gone. And in the theater department, they call it a tech widow. And it's, while the doctor might be home, if he's mentally and emotionally completely depleted, it's kind of like you're a doctor's widow, in the marriage.
Yeah,
definitely.
And so, we work this out, and I say this, I have a tremendous amount of thanks that she did this, because I really was not spending the kind of quality time that I needed to have with my children. And so I became, I said, okay, honey, this is what we'll do. You take care of dinner. I'll try to entertain them as much as I can. And then when dinner was over, I would take them upstairs, take care of the baths, and read them and tuck them in. And being a part of that as a father, now that nearly all three of our kids are out of the house, I'm and having the relationship that I have with all three of them, I likely wouldn't have had that had she not have had the courage to bring that up to me and for me to find that out, because what I have with them now is, you can't put a price on that. You just can't. But I know that happens with a lot of physician wives and mothers. I mean, if you don't concentrate and be present, you lose that, and that's something really difficult to get back. Once
I know I don't know if you have the same sensation, but the second children are born, time just really speeds up, and you blink and suddenly they're 10 years old. And so if you don't have, if you don't have the courage, or sometimes I call it the chutzpah, to step up and say, hey, something's wrong here, you're going to miss your kid's entire life. And suddenly they're married and they're like, I don't really know who you are. And that's a real danger.
And we see that all the time.
It's
all the time, because, it's kind of, I think, accepted in the medical profession, especially with docs, that, there's a lot of them expected professionally, and a lot that they really don't need to do at home, because so much is expected professionally. And it really does put issues into their lives with their family.
And what you see is, like, my dad used to do this. And I certainly have tried not to do it. The way he showed love was by giving me a $20 bill now and then. Or let's go to the toy store. I remember and that was after a time that I hadn't seen him for a while. And doctors fall into that trap, is, they're caught up with, material possessions and the drive to do better. But to what end and at what point is enough? And and you've not had a relationship with your kids, but now and then you say, okay, well let's go to the baseball game, or let's do this or that, and then the next time it's always the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to guide. Awareness is so important, and as physicians, we terribly lack it unless it has something to do with our patients, or it has something to do with that. This other awareness in our relationships really falls by the wayside.
And I bet it's getting worse too, because the demands on physicians are just going through the roof as hospitals are being owned by bigger and bigger corporations. I mean, they have to see sometimes 10 patients an hour.
Yes, it's absolutely ridiculous. So what you have happening is you have a higher amount of physician suicide. You have destroyed families all over the place. You've got docs that are addicted to alcohol and other things because they need that to cope. You know, that's how they cope and decompress when they come home.
Similar to police officers or firefighters, right?
Yes. Absolutely. And the injury of having to be perfect all day long, and no one around them is allowing them to be human. And so, you know, I've coined the expression that going through medical training and just going through that process dehumanizes docs, because they have to shut off emotions. They have to turn off so many parts of being human in order to go through the grueling process, in order to go through the training and residencies, and then, you know, take care of that schedule. And we teach them how to be human again.
You know, your relationship should be a safe space. You know, you come home to it. But unfortunately, what happens with a lot of couples in this area is it's a dumping ground. It's a venting space, and it should never be that way. And so again, it's about bringing them to an awareness of these things. And what is causing you to react this way? Is it work? Is it the stress you have on you? Is it your upbringing? Is it your personality? Is it, or is it a combination of everything? Which it is.
Combination of everything.
Do you find that certain physicians, like surgeons versus pediatricians, have a personality type that is a certain way, or is it not so consistent?
I mean, a lot of it, as you said, it could be specialty dependent. I mean, as a surgeon, you have to be right in what you do.
You have to be right, and yet you don't have to have the best bedside manner because your patients are asleep.
Correct.
So.
Yeah.
I mean, just to give you a little story, I remember when I was in training, when I was an intern, I worked with a surgeon, and the intern before me said, "Oh man, you know, he scared me to death." And the guy, it turned out to be right. He used to throw instruments. Oh, wow. He would berate surgical techs and surgical nurses, and let alone me, who's trying to learn something. And he was just being a total ass. And I'm like, I want to have nothing to do with this. I understood the stress, but you got to be human. You know, there's just, you know, that kind of, unfortunately, that kind of behavior, you know, it was something that always had been there over the years and had gotten to be accepted. Yeah. It's not that way now, but not nearly as much. But
I live and work out of LA. I mean, obviously, like most of us post-COVID, you can work all over the world. But I have some celebrity clients, and they're similar. I mean, like if you walk, it's like if they're late, they're like, "Well, that's your problem." I mean, you know, it's like, what's going on here?
And there's just no reason for that kind of behavior. Because and I'm thinking, is this how you treat your wife?
Right.
Is this how you treat your significant other like this? Or is it just in the operating room? Or with other doctors who you may consider to be subservient than you because you're an intern or a resident and I'm an attending. So that gives me carte blanche to act this way. But you talk to people like that. Some of them have been through 2 and 3 marriages, and there have been times in training where I wanted to say, has it been worth it to you to go through relationships, have multiple mothers with your kids, likely not know who any of them are? Yeah, you're doing well monetarily, but at what cost?
Absolutely.
So it's about bringing that kind of awareness to them. And I said, when you're older and you're looking back on your life, is it that you're looking back and saying, wow, I should have driven a Bentley, or I should have driven a Maserati? No, you're not looking back at that. You're looking back at time that you didn't spend, or more time that you wish you had. And we try to give them that kind of vision to say, it's nice to want to have a good life for you and your kids, but at some point that's got to stop, and there needs to be a concentration on other things that are falling by the wayside as a result of this drop.
So tell me a little bit about what it's like to work with you guys. What does that look like? How do you approach it? Because I think that for someone in this space, they're probably sitting here listening, nodding, going, yep. So what is the process of actually diving in and doing the work look like?
The process is, getting on a call with us and just telling us a little bit about what the pain points are and the struggles. And really, there is so much that revolves around communication, and people just don't know how to do it in relationship. So that's the first thing that we teach. We teach them how to talk to each other so that it comes across as human to human, and in such a way where we try to limit the triggering, so to speak, and the defensive-ness, but just getting real down into the vulnerability of how are they really feeling about, and we work on certain topics, and of course we give them homework, and we're teaching skills, and also sharing our life with them, and they're picking up modeling techniques from us, like, well, here's how we handled this. And
you're right, we're not supposed to do that as therapists, but I push the boundaries. I mean, all the great ones do it anyway. It's like
isn't that true? And so, what does a real love, real marriage look like? Unless you look into that, chances are you've not seen what it looks like. All you're doing is consuming what Hollywood and society has pushed out. Do most people know that there are stages of a healthy relationship? That we all, that feeling that you get in the beginning is not going to last the entire marriage. If you happen to want to be in a long-term marriage. And most people think they just fell out of love. No, that's just what happens. This is the trajectory that a normal relationship goes through. And then teaching that and helping them deal with perhaps disappointment around that. And
so it sounds like there's some coping skills. There's some like proper expectation setting. There's some communication tools, all great stuff that you're right. I mean, I always tell my clients when they call in and they're trying to figure out if I'm the right guy, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm the right guy, right? These are the things we talk about. It's like nobody is taught this. I don't know a single parent. I haven't taught it to my kids, right? Maybe when they're getting ready of marriage age, I'll sit them down, but I have so many people on this show, and nobody has ever met someone who just naturally learned this growing up. You have to seek it out. You have to get the training.
Definitely. And does that mean we are perfect? Jeep and I mean, absolutely not. And we share that.
We use a phrase called "perfectly imperfect."
That's good.
And
like
it's exactly right. We do have couples when they seek us out to fill out it's called a healthy relationship quiz. And so we ask them, So we get an idea before we start our program with them, where they're at and what the trouble that that they're having. But in the first part, like she said, we concentrate on communication, and we kind of got into this a little bit earlier, but we have them take a personality quiz because some of them don't even know what their personality is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh,
I bet that kind of sets the table for the way you kind of direct them and guide them.
Oh, absolutely, because there are facets of a personality that present itself in relationship to, and when you have that with someone, for example, I'm previously trained with numbers, accounting, finance, right?
So that left side of your brain is like a Christmas tree inside, right?
Exactly.
Definitely. And so sometimes I react like that. And that's hard for someone like Jeep, who is very outgoing and
I'm right-brained.
Yeah. So
more emotionally triggered as opposed to logic based. Yeah.
Yes. And there are light bulb moments that go off where they say, "Oh, that's why you do what you do." So it's really giving them the opportunity to learn more about themselves so that they can create the relationship that they want. And in doing that, of course, they have to talk about it. And so then, working with us, we teach them how to reframe challenges. Everybody's got them, right? And determine which ones are solvable and which ones aren't solvable. And then the last part is dealing with sexuality, and that's what everybody leaves out.
As you know, John, I think I read an article that if your sex life, your intimate life is okay, it takes about 15% of the energy in your relationship. But if it's bad, it sucks up about 80%.
I would agree with that.
So many things can be related back to that lack of intimate communication. But if you're not getting along, I mean, who's going to want to go and be in such a vulnerable position and to want to give yourself when you're sitting back there and thinking you're a jerk. I don't want.
My mentor, one of my mentors, had a great expression that I use all the time. Sex is the oil that keeps the squeaky wheel quiet.
I'm gonna have to use that. I like that a lot.
There again, sex is not taught in our culture. We're just expected to know. And for example, if you're brought up in a traditional Italian Catholic family, oh my gosh, that wasn't even talked about. So how do I even know what I want to feel? How I want to, what does that look like?
I remember in my own life, I think I was 15 or 16, I started to date, and my dad is Israeli, very masculine guy. And I was confused by something. And I said, I have this girl. And he said, you know what? We don't have to talk about everything. That was what he said. And I went, okay. Never once brought it up again with my dad. I'm just like, okay, now I got to go somewhere else. And the internet was emerging at the time. So I went, oh, I found it.
I'll tell you a funny story. Our daughter was of the age where she was starting to ask questions. And so, of course, him being the doctor, I was like, when are you going to sit down and talk to her about this? While he was so uncomfortable. So one day we were in a parking lot. He goes into Lowe's to buy something. She's in the back seat. I'm with her. She asked me questions and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do it. So I bring out a napkin, a pen, and I started drawing and teaching, the birds and the bees, so to speak. He could not believe I did that.
No, you didn't say what she said. I'm walking out of Lowe's, going to the car, and she goes, guess what, Daddy? Mommy told me about sex. And I was like...
it's how old was she?
I think 11 or 12.
Yeah,
My oldest
probably
is
around
turning
there.
12 this summer, and I'm like trying to peek in and see, and he's in a school where the
Yeah.
boys and girls are separate, so it's like I don't know if that affects him at all. So it's kind of, it's interesting, but you're right, it's kind of right up, we're at the precipice of having that conversation. A couple years ago,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, since you shared a fun story, my son and I were going to, I think it was an amusement park, could be Six Flags or something. And these days I let the kids watch TV in the car, on the phone and whatnot, just to keep it busy if it's a long drive. And my younger kids are I have four. So I had a couple of younger kids in the back, and I think he was watching The Simpsons, and there was a joke made with the number 69 in it, and he starts laughing. And I go, and I just kind of give him a look to see if he gets it. And he said, "Do you know what 69 is?" And I went, "Yeah, we're not going to talk about it." I had a 3 or 4-year-old in the back. I said, "Okay." And then I brought it up with my wife, and I said, "I don't, he's way too young to know what this is. I mean, that's not just sex. That's advanced sex position." So I was like, "Okay, what's going on here?" And she said, "Well, why don't you?" My wife being the calm, therapist, she's like, "We need to do some exploratory." And she's like, "Why don't you ask him if he knows what it means alone and stuff?" And so I said, "Okay." And it was nerve wracking. And I said, "Hey, you said this joke about 69, you know what it is?" He goes, "Yeah, it's a rapper." And I went, "What?" He goes, "It's a hip hop artist, same 69. And I went, "Oh." I said, "Well, that's not the joke. It means something, sexual." And he went, "I don't want to know. I don't want to know." And he kind of kicked me out of his. And I went, "Man, my wife is a genius. All I had to do was ask a question." But you never know, right? I mean, especially with the culture of hip hop, where like the rapper calls himself 69, he thinks it's funny but there's 9-year-olds listening to your music, and now they don't understand why your name is that. So it's pretty fascinating.
I love that story.
And our son, he kind of never wanted to hear about it. It was like just like your son, but I think he was 11 or 12, and he said, "I already know all about that, Dad." I'm like,
so
really?
This and just imagine we have a tough time talking to our kids about it. So they see that, and later it becomes them having a tough time talking about sexuality between the two of them, between the husband and the wife.
And there's always one partner that's more squeamish to talk about it than the other.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we totally normalize that, and just, of course, through written work and exercises that we do to make it a subject where the whole idea is getting to know your partner more deeply.
And just to be able, I think some couples, just to be able to hear from each other in ways that they probably have never done or given voice to. I mean, think about it. How often do we talk to each other during intimacy? Right. Mm-hmm. Do we talk about it before? Do we talk about it after? Likely no. I mean, if we're considerate, we lay and embrace and enjoy what's happened. But do we really talk about how we feel, how that was? Is this good while it's happening? Before that, right. And it to me, when a couple finds that, when they have the ability to do that, it opens up so much more connection by having that kind of vulnerability.
Well, all this sounds great. I commend you on doing some work like this for 3 decades now. If someone does want to reach out and work with you, what's a easy way for them to find you?
The best way to find us is on our website, which is Best Friends Again. And, when we decided to name our business, we kind of looked at what do the newly engaged and the newlyweds have in common, because, our daughter was going through that. And we sat and thought and watched them, and it was they are best friends. And somewhere between when we're engaged and get married and then life hitting us in the face, we kind of lose that connection. And so we are best friends again, teaching them how to be best friends again.
And we're on LinkedIn. Vanessa has a profile. I have a profile, and then we have a company page called Best Friends Again, and we do talks. Besides so graciously having us on your show, we are doing a talk at a conference in Chicago in September. It's called the Women in Medicine Summit. We were there last year, and we got asked back again this year, and we're going to be doing a breakout session there. I think it's the September 22nd and 23rd. Lots of lovely women there, and it's usually it's the woman in the relationship that's seeking out the help. You don't see the guy, unfortunately, that's out there asking for help. So we're looking forward to that. It's in Chicago. It will be online as well, and so you can find that. But I think two things I would say in conclusion is, please don't let things, and talking to my colleagues, please don't let things go on and think that that it's too difficult to talk to, and there's nobody out there that wants to listen, because the effects of not doing that it's going to be the breakup of things that can cost you a lot monetarily as well as emotionally. Yeah. And that we've been through these things, and we're out there, and we're out there to help.
Jeep and Vanessa, Naum, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. The website, again, for anyone listening, is bestfriendsagain.com. If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3 secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.